Hey, everybody, and welcome back to YouAreFreeTV. It is Tuesday, February 21st. So happy to be back here on the channel with you. Today's going to be a great show. This is Cartel Babylon, episode 5. We'll also cover some of the East Palestine, Ohio situation. So much going on around there to talk about. So with our Cartel Babylon series, we're going to have Michael McKibben and Douglas Gabriel joining me very shortly here. And what we've been doing in this series is uncovering usury as a weapon of control of humanity since the ancient times, coming out of Babylon. And that there has been a continual and continuously related cartel throughout history, moving through societies all throughout the world, using this usury system and the banking system, okay? They're the gangster banksters that have been forming this ongoing increasing prison planet. And so we've gotten into the history in several of the videos so far. We'll still touch back into some of that here. And then we'll get into current events to do with Cartel Babylon and discuss, what we can do to awareness is key. The information war is key, but we really need to come up with solutions on how we can stop these banksters. So we'll bring in everyone here. Hi, y'all.
Hello.
And so, folks, just to remind you, Douglas Gabriel, he is the father of 4. He says that is his number 1 achievement. And yet he also is the former NSA analyst and a former priest and monk. And he is also a great writer on spiritual and metaphysical things. You can find him at Gabriel's_horn on Gab, which I will link below, and we'll do the banners throughout the video. And then we have Michael McKibben, who was one of the original creators of the technology for social media platforms and had to go to war, or was the subject who went to war against by the big tech guerrillas and Cartel Babylon there. So welcome to you both. Oh, and you can find his work on AmericansForInnovation.com, which I'll also be linking below. All right. So diving in, you heard my intro monologue. I thought that when we had talked before the discussion, a great jumping off point could be this aspect, Douglas. Perhaps you could start here with a rounding, enlarging what I just said about what Cartel Babylon is, and then moving into the actuality and the symbolism of Joe Biden on President's Day, okay, as the fake president. Riding on a train from Poland into Kiev, and the symbolism of that you brought up and its relation to this satanic cartel Babylon.
Well, Michael's the expert on that, but we both note that, going to Kiev is basically bowing to the one thing that Putin loves, which is that's the home of the Rus. And so here he is going to the place where the Khazarians adopted a Judaism, which at that time had nothing to do with the Hebrews. I guess you'd call it what St. John in the Apocalypse calls it, the fake Jews. And that's what these people are. They're worshiping Moloch in that synagogue. They're not worshiping the Elohim or El or Jehovah or any of the gods of the Hebrews. No. They are worshiping human blood sacrifice, which was very big in Babylon at the time that the supposed Jews in captivity, which were already there ahead of time, we always point out that they supposedly captive, taken to Babylon. No, they were already ruling Babylon by the time they were taken captive, and they didn't go unwillingly. And right there in Babylon, they're now, strangely enough, digging up some amazing things that are demonstrating just how wicked these Babylonians were. And so the Rhadanites were the Jews who lived in the area of Radan, which is in Babylon. And basically, you can see that there are connections to the Silk Road, there are connections to Europe, to the Roman trade routes, eventually led them up into Khazaria, where we get this mythology that the Khazarian mafia are the real Hebrews. No, they're not. They're the fake Jews in the synagogue of Satan, and they are worshiping, and they co-opted Judaism just so that they could move into Europe out because the Muslims were taking over the Silk Road. They were moving into Europe to control the tribal leaders, the warriors. Remember, Europe was ruled by the strongest. You're in a tribe and your leader was the one who could kill his own brothers and sisters and probably mother and father and then go out and kill the enemy. They were then controlled by the banksters, the gangster banksters, as you called them. That's beautiful. I love that title. And the original banksters were from where? Babylon. So if anyone has any true association to the way that it happened, it is through these banksters. And I love that you always remind us that it's the usury. Now, and I always add, usury is a tax on money so that you make money from money when you don't even have the money, especially in Babylon where they had fractional banking and all of our modern things, all supported by what? The Babylonian Rhadanites, when we're talking about them, those are our politicians. Those are the people serving the global corporatists who don't pay taxes. Let's remember, when we're talking about these evil ones, and we can name them, the Pilgrim Society, but also the aristocrats in America and the corporate leaders, they don't pay taxes. They're not Americans. They're certainly not nationalists, and they're into a corporate communism, in my opinion. And so what we're seeing acted out on the stage, no matter which direction you want to look, whether it's East Palestine and the explosion, whether you want to look to Ukraine, whether you look to Putin and what he's doing in Russia, the Nord Stream, it doesn't matter. It's all the same story. It is a story of the rich who have the money, who say they have the money, taxing the rest of us. You are taxed and your money is taken from you before you get your payroll check. You don't even own your money. And that is what exactly the Rhadanite Babylonians wanted to do. Put you into economic slavery through usury, taxes, and the same old bankster rules that they've been using up to this very moment.
Very well said. And I also wanted to bring in and tie in here that we're talking about stolen identity here. And when we're talking about the stolen Hebrew identity. And also, just to clarify further, that when we're talking about Cartel Babylon, while it began, out of Babylon with these Rhadanite merchants who basically stole the identity of the Hebrews and then moved as a cartel, throughout the world and the ages, it brought in everybody from every so-called religion or prominent place to be part of what is this, they call themselves the elite system of banksters who then formed their secret societies and formed these banking alliances for this prison planet system that is that work of the ages that you have the Masons talking about, you have the Luciferians talking about, and the only religion really uniting them is the satanic one. And quite often what we see in this is the scapegoating of the Jewish people who, one thing that I think was really amazing to point out this fact was a documentary done recently by an 84-year-old Holocaust survivor, a Jewish woman, whose name I don't have in front of me right now, but who put out the documentary called Never Again Is Now Global, basically comparing the genocide of the pandemic shots, to what happened to Jews in Nazi Germany and all the people that died in Nazi Germany, and talking about the systemic genociding of people. And she talks about, and many people in this documentary, which I will link below, you can watch it on Children's Health Defense TV, .tv, chd.tv, where so many people who are Jewish people are talking about how Israel is genociding its own people with the mandatory vaccines by giving the power of the health department of Israel over to Pfizer. You have Netanyahu saying outright, we're using the Israeli Jews as guinea pigs, right? And it's an amazing documentary. It's an important part of this piece to see how the use of the genocide against the Israeli nation is just as much part of this. There's no alliance or allegiance about anybody, except for the elites that go across all religious barriers. And also they're very secularist. The thing they're most attacking, of course, is Christianity because of its golden rule, because of its ability to elevate all ships, right? Rise the waters and elevate all ships, as JFK said. And so that is the situation. This isn't only about a certain group of people. The secularism is actually the most satanic of all in bringing about this new prison planet system. And so just to be clear, this is what began as a Rhadanite merchant group moving out in cartels across the world, used by the other elites of other societies to get their dirty business done with banking of the economy of sin. Okay, it grew. It's everybody. Okay, it's all peoples that are interconnected through secret societies and through the banking elite system. So I just wanted to clarify that. Moving on. And so there was this, there was the attempt to steal, there was the stealing of the identity of what would have been the actual real genetic Hebrews into this cartel, these cartel families, interconnected, intermarrying families that moved across the Middle East into Western Asia, and then up into Europe and Khazaria and all that area. And so this is what we're trying to kind of see, that flow of history of how that went, and that everywhere where this cartel went, besides usury, it was all of the sins of economy, and the economy of sins, right? So it's all of the stuff about human trafficking, slavery, drugs, spying for information to gain more and more wealth. All of this was their trade, and it got basically just continuously Ponzi scheme after Ponzi scheme moving through the world, right? Into now, right, we're here living it on steroids constantly. And so I wanted to maybe bring you in, Michael, and if you could come back to what I was saying about the situation of Biden, good old Amtrak Joe, going into Poland, arriving on his famous train right after our big train derailment here, and the whole symbolism there. But the situation of that area and the demonic, because there's a demonic, satanic energy behind these.
I mean, think of the how bizarre is it that a president of the United States flies into Poland, probably landed in Warsaw, drove down to probably Katowice or Krakow, and then got on a train and took a train all the way to Kiev through Lvov, all the way to. That is so bizarre that you can't possibly imagine or explain why he would do that in any other way except this. Let me give you a few facts. After the Seljuk Turks captured Babylon, this was prior to the First Crusade, the Rhadanites had already moved out of there, renamed themselves Ashkenazi, and then continued to ply their banker merchant trade all over Europe. They started developing northern trade routes to replace the ones that the Seljuk Turks were blocking. And so they developed a northern route for the Silk Road. And that northern route, one of those key routes, Pat, I'm going to just summarize it from Berlin on. Went from Berlin to Western Poland to Katowice, then on through the Polish border to the Ukraine, which would have been in the area of Przemyśl, which was a large merchant town anciently in Poland. And then they went from there to Lvov, and then from there to Kiev. And then if you keep going, they went down to Khazaria, which is now the Crimea, and then on to China. So there was a very strong northern trade route that went exactly along the line that Biden just took from Poland to Kiev. And I don't think you can explain that in any other way than Biden was communing with his demon. And then he met another demon in Zelensky, which was also a Babylonian Rhadonite. And these guys are comparing notes for some reason, but I think they probably drew evil energy from each other. I'm going to stop there because it's so bizarre. This can be the only explanation.
Hey, when everything's bizarre, nothing is bizarre, right? Isn't that
exactly?
Isn't that the way? But I'll just say that, well, obviously, Joe, I'm sure collected a lot more than his demonic fill, right? As far as the Benjamins, as they say, right? Just to quote Ilhan Omar. But basically, I'm sure there was a lot more exchanged, and this whole train thing is very, very fitting for all of that. But But there's also this, it happens on President's Day. It's all these reversals, right? They always lie. It's these biggest lies, So we have our fake president going to the fake president of Ukraine, both of them fake, both of them installed, right? Laughing at it, but it's that evil, right? It's those biggest lies.
Right.
Is the satanic method. It's the satanic method. And so that whole show of that, I think, was that here's two fake presidents who are literally creating World War III together, okay, to do a massive ritual against humanity, and are going full scorched earth, okay, to build back better Ukraine in the image of the beast. And so it couldn't be more appropriate, right? And it's where Biden went and did his Heil Hitler, as Douglas was mentioning earlier, right before the Maidan coup and the funding of the Azov battalion by Soros et al. And the Blinkens, right? And the Blinkens who are the biggest supporters of the Soros Foundation, his father on his natural side, and then his stepfather being one of an Israeli spy, connected to Robert Maxwell, the last one to talk to him before he was murdered on the Israeli side. Okay. And then him just going to Turkey. And this is just yesterday, right? Or the day before yesterday, he goes to Turkey over the weekend after what are so-called the earthquake weapons this is being said by Romanian senators are calling this out. People of military background from Europe calling this out, and that we get now close to 50,000 dead in Turkey, the entire infrastructure destroyed. And Blinken says, I'm going to go over now and see, got to go to Turkey, like you do, right? And they give him, a couple $100 million, and they say, we're going to urge you, right, to bring in Finland and bring in Sweden into NATO, which is exactly what the Minsk agreements were about, exactly what everything about pushing the beast, pushing the bear with Putin. We're not going to increase NATO, and we're not going to bring ever Ukraine into either NATO or the EU. And now in the Munich Security Conference, all they've been pushing is we must bring immediately Ukraine into the EU, right? And we must do this immediately. And so Blinken leaves Turkey and basically said, well, I urged very strongly, right, now that there's 50,000 dead people. And we also have an incredible, very brave senator out of Romania, of course, where they're on, doing their exercises and right up there at the border, right there. She's basically calling out, Romanians aren't going to be cannon fodder, okay, for this scorched earth war in Ukraine. That it's all a complete false. That's completely false. And she actually calls the people in charge Pharisees. And I thought this was very amazing how people are catching on to the Cartel Babylon situation.
Right.
And she basically claims that, she says straight out, I have military people telling me these are earthquake weapons. She says these are Pharisees. She calls out the involvement of multiple basically banksters and the state of Israel, and the commonalities between all of these people, their interconnections, and a very brave thing to do, for a senator in Romania right now at the brink of war here. So I wanted to just bring that in and ask you about this, or your opinion about these earthquakes in Turkey. All of this in this area, all of this, such a potent Cartel Babylon energetic connection with ancient history, but also something larger, something energetically larger. I think that has to do more with this battle of principalities and powers. We have this Christian Orthodox nation, the oldest, probably closest to true Christianity, as far as biblical sense, that we know of, going up against.
The Orthodox Church goes back
Cartel.
to the disciples. Right.
And I was wondering if you could speak to that in the sense of Cartel Babylon. Why there? Why now? And why, in the overall sense of the, the Antichrist, they're trying to jump the shark on the Antichrist. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, I think from a demonic standpoint, Jesus gave us a clear example when he was dealing with the devil, and he said, "Get behind me, Satan." And that has authority and power. And he gave that power to the church. And so what I think is going on here is the reason these Babylonian Rhadanites are attacking Christianity right now, especially, is because that power resides, the power of Christ to command the demons to take a back seat is in the church. And so therefore they know that. And so what they're trying to do is disempower the church in every way they can. And as we have seen historically, when they can't do it in any other influential way, they just try to kill everybody. I mean, look at Stalin, for an example. He killed up to 40 million Ukrainian kulak farmers because they were Christians. There's no other explanation. And he tried to wipe out Christianity in the Ukraine in the past. And of course, he was under the instructions of the British. That's proven now. And so that we've got every one of these supposed conflicts we've seen in our lifetimes and prior were the creations of these Babylonian Rhadonite bankers who funded both sides of every war because it's good for business. And as a result, we're now in the current plan. And the reason they've got to attack Russia is because Russia's, I think it's 11 time zones. It's a big country. It's got a huge number of resources. And it's largely a historically Christian nation, although for 70, 80 years, the communists tried mightily to wipe that out. And yet they were not able to, and the church is reviving. That doesn't mean that the people, any individual person within the Orthodox Church is perfect. But what it does mean is they are looking to a power greater than themselves in Jesus Christ for helping them correct the sins of the past and move forward. And I think that's why they're being attacked now.
Thank you. Yeah, that I agree. That makes a lot of sense. And it seems to be, coming to bear and show that is the case. We're getting dangerously close. We're in de facto world war already. The United States is absolutely involved, absolutely, operating the machine behind the scenes here, and not really even behind the scenes. And so, this is, I believe, an attack on all of humanity. What's going on there? I believe it.
Douglas is the expert on this question you had earlier about, was this an engineering induced earthquake? And I'd like to hear what Douglas has to say about that. Hey, you're on mute.
Uh-oh, you're asking my opinion? Well, did y'all notice the pictures right before the earthquake? Did you see any of those? Look at the blue flashes of light. They came from the ground, they went up, and they were pervasive, and they flashed like lightning, but they cannot be described by anything that anybody knows anything about. But look in the front of the picture, and you'll see hundreds and hundreds of blue balls, translucent looking balls floating through the air. Well, that happens anytime there's an earthquake. But those big flashes of light, that's what people think were either directed energy weapons or HARP that was focused. Now, HARP focuses on the aurora borealis, but HARP cannot focus on a specific country and place to cause an earthquake. It can stimulate the ionosphere and the electric atmosphere, and so that it can be conducive to that. But the United States used against New Zealand, when John Kerry went there to steal Maori land, they used a ship which uses Reichian and Teslian technology, which is a simple form of basically extremely low frequency generation at a specific pulse, which then affects, as we know, the HARP creates the communications with ships underneath the ice cap through ELF and VLF. And so that's what that can do. Well, does that upset the substructure of the Earth? Yes, it does. Can it be focused? Not usually. They have much better ways to do that. And it isn't from directed energy weapons. It's from accelerated particle beams that are diffuse so that you can't actually see them. So you wouldn't see those stimulating the Earth so that you might have the earthquakes. But can America, and does America use a weapon, a Teslian weapon that they've had for a long time, since the time of Reich. Reich created earthquakes with a device that he could fit in his pocket. Okay, he put it up on the post of his house, and an earthquake would start the next day. And what was it? It was a pulse frequency generator. So we know that Rudolf Steiner said that when this time came that we would start to manipulate vibration and frequency for ill intent, that you'd be able to do these things. So I think you're right, Free. I think you're absolutely right. And just by circumstantial evidence, an earthquake like this there has never really happened, even in ancient history per se. They know that by looking at the terrain, and they know that these lights happened. And so, of course, Erdogan saw those pictures that we saw, but they also had no engineers involved in building multi-story buildings, and they all just collapsed like they were cardboard. Because why? The substructure was inadequate. It was criminal. And so what did he do? He gathered all those people up, put them in jail. He's a very ruthless person. Don't get me into the people that have crossed over to be the refugees in his country, because he makes billions of dollars a year doing that. And sometimes he just gives a million of them, 1.4 million at one time, to the Chinese to become slaves. This is well known by the ships that went and picked them up, by the waterline on the ship, and is the largest carrier that China has. Why did they come to Syria? That's a war crime. I mean, that's incentive for war, to have China come and bring their largest troop carrier for Erdogan to load up and sell these refugees. 1.4 million of them came up missing, though they supposedly have accurate records of this. But that's nothing. Turkey is exactly as you say. It's the linchpin of NATO, the European Union, and the incursion into Russian border space. So if Finland becomes part of NATO, you cannot in any way threaten Putin and his Russia any more than that. And of course, we always give missiles to every country that's on their border, and then try to say they're for defensive purposes, and they're not. So, it's such a big fat lie. And Biden going to Kiev, I looked at those pictures. How come half the pictures look exactly like when Pelosi went there? And how come no one is guarding them? And they're walking around Kiev and everything's working. Well, no, they just told us they have no power. And they also told us all their railroads were blown up. So how does he go into a war zone, basically advertise it to the Russians who could blow him up? But they don't want to blow him up because he's their friend.
Well, did you see that one set of pictures where he and Zelensky are walking out front of a monastery, big, huge monastery? I don't know if that was Lavra or not, but I mean, how cynical can they get to protect themselves, because they know that Putin's not going to bomb that monastery or try to rocket them. So they go hide next to a Christian structure in order to protect themselves. I mean,
Zelensky
these people
is a press whore, and he's bad at his propaganda. He's bad at his lies. He says he wants nothing to do with peace, even from the first peace meeting they had, where they paid him off and he left without even sitting down and discussing anything, with a suitcase full of what? Gold bearer bonds. Okay, that's what always happens. Biden went to Kiev to get his share in gold bearer bonds because he didn't want his son to have to expose his business again. And he had to sneak there. He didn't go on a train. That's complete, absolute insanity. And he didn't walk around the city that's all blown up and has no infrastructure. And supposedly they have no water or power. Okay, if they have no water or power, no railroad, how did he get on a railroad? He goes, first off, it's against all protocol. And though he has dementia, I don't care. It's exactly what the two of you said. He was embodying himself with what people would call the fake Jews, or the Khazarian mafia, as it were. And the Khazarian mafia is Zelensky. He might as well have a poster in his office of the Khazarian mafia, because that's who he is. And anyone who thinks otherwise is silly. It's going to go back to Russia. There is nothing we can do. What Zelensky did in Donbass was one of the worst criminal acts of war against humanity that anyone has ever seen. He bombed his own people, and it's a minimum of 100,000 he killed, probably way more than 200,000. So he used up all his ammo blowing up his own people in Donbass, and then says Russia invaded them. Now, Russia came in because they had voted to go with Russia. just like Crimea, completely legal. But am I on Putin's side? I'm on nobody's side, because you can't tell. I don't know hardly any truth that has come out of Ukraine or Russia since this whole mess started. But it has everything to do with the pipelines, which I pointed out. And I pointed out that the key factor will be Nord Stream, long before it was cut and long before Trump ever called Merkel out to say, you have ripped off the entire European Union by having a deal with our enemy, Russia. Therefore, NATO, he went over for a NATO meeting. He said, NATO is defunct because of your deal with Russia. He said this on air. He told the whole world. She never admitted it, and the European Union never held her to task for it. And she was jacking up the price. So this is a German against the Russian, same thing as World War I and II. German, which is really British, which controls the Brits, against Russia. Because if those two forces, if Europe and Asia through Russia combine, and what's in the middle? Ukraine. So Ukraine is the golden ring that they're all trying to grab. And I can guarantee you that at this point, as far as I can tell, in my personal opinion, Putin's actions demonstrate that he's insane. And his people are saying that. And he threw out one of his top military leaders from a window again a couple of days ago, or someone did, and he allowed it to happen. You know, and if the oligarchs don't pay their tax to him, then they don't get to run the monopolies that used to be the Russian government. So what we have here is a war of all against all, and the confusion is to hide the Babylonian cartel, which are the same old usual suspects. You don't even have to hardly look into it. I mean, did you have to look up that the railroad train, Norfolk Southern, was owned by Vanguard, JP Morgan, State Street? I mean, they own everything. So who are those guys? That's the real issue. Those are the Babylonian cartel.
They want it all.
Yeah. Well, they're really going for all of it at this point, right? They've consolidated so much at this point as far as ownership of everything, control of everything. It's really vast, and it is getting to the totalitarian. It's beyond totalitarianism into almost the totality point. Okay. And when we look at, that they're doing this future shock, this constant, just everywhere, these catastrophes, while behind the scenes, they're just buying up all the land where it's all happening. And when we talk about, the Khazarian mafia, we can talk about the Ukrainian mafia, right? And we can talk about how a lot of speculation out there about so much of the catastrophes happening in the U.S., the sabotage events, are connected with Ukrainian nationals and connected with foreign operatives. We even, and this is interesting, we know there's so many mercenaries, hired U.S. and other mercenaries in Ukraine. There's that great researcher, Syria Girl. I don't know if you ever watched Syrian Girl, but she's amazing, very awesome brain. And she was able to get hold of a video showing that it was one of these videos that they do for BBC to try to convince them to give them more money and all of this. And they had ISIS patches on their uniforms, right? ISIS right there. And so it's just exposing how they just, they'll go wherever they're sent, wherever they're told to do. And that these mercenaries are so much, they're Cartel Babylon, but they are hugely United States run and controlled.
Well, keep in mind, ISIS is another name for the Thames River in England.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. Right. Well, just the whole ISIS thing in general, it's, what a moniker. So, okay. So if we think Ukrainian mafia and we come to the United States and we look at all the sabotage, I was wondering if we might want to come across here to the US. I mean, we look at, when we talk about the destruction of Ukraine and the Build Back Better into the beast model, right? A lot of it has to do with food production. We had the slavery that came out of the usury system. One of the earliest parts of it, right, was the grain system, was the Neolithic period, the takeover of the food, right? And so
barley.
Right. And so you have to pay in your barley, you pay in your grain. And if you can't pay, you're a slave, right? And so that was a takeover from the hunter-gatherer or small domestic animal way of life of the healthy people. It changed our stature, made people smaller, dumber, a lot of people could argue, more controllable. less testosterone, I would say. And so now they're doing that food revolution again, right, into this vaccine infused agriculture run by AI that is vertical inside with LED lights, right? Yum, feed it to me.
Mm-hmm.
With the fake meat, that's even worse than the awful vegetables. So in the bugs, can't forget that. Can't forget the locusts and the symbolism there. But when we look at things like this catastrophe over the heartlands, right, in America, how we keep seeing the sabotage happening here in the U.S., the buying up of the farmland, the leasing of all the farmland of Ukraine already to Cargill, Monsanto, everybody Bayer for the Build Back Better, Gates.
And Archer Daniels Midland.
Yes.
ADM.
Yes. And so I wanted to kind of get into this Ohio situation because we did a video the other day where I touched in at the end there, just touching in about, is this a planned execution? And there are so many things that point towards that being yes. I just heard today that in East Palestine, well, we know Trump's arriving there tomorrow. Okay. So this is interesting. He's arriving there tomorrow. And we get the Reagan, the EPA advisor or director of the EPA was heading off to Africa, right? A couple of days ago with Idris Elba and apparently Idris Elba is everywhere now with the Elba Foundation. They must raise awareness about the climate and inequity in Africa, et cetera. And so he's running back from his star-studded 7-day tour of Africa to come back to East Palestine now. And so is, I call him George Burns DeWine, the Oh God book 1 and 2. I think that he's going to be there as well now, where they wouldn't show up before. And the Department of Health in Ohio just set up a clinic, right? Just set up a clinic there in East Palestine for the people with the MyID electronic fobs. They can come, and I'm sure if they get a booster, it'll protect them from the mustard gas, right? I'm sure it will. It protects you against volcanoes, like earthquakes, car crashes, and it'll definitely protect against the mustard gas, right? And so we have this exploration of, could that be possible? Is it released? And we saw this great article, and I heard, Douglas, you wanted to comment on it, and want to hear both of your opinions. That Lindsay from Texas, on her Substack, or Texas Lindsay, is where I read this article on her Substack, where basically saying evacuate, everybody on the East Coast, because that vinyl chloride wouldn't have burned up. It wouldn't have been hot enough with enough oxygen in that fire to burn up all that vinyl chloride. And it's in the sky, coming east, coming north, coming everywhere, and that it's going to come down in acid rain and lead to really fast-moving lymphoma-based cancers, right? And we explored the other option of, well, no, maybe that didn't happen, and instead they're coloring the water with the nickel oxide for other reasons, which we'll get into further here. So, do you mind if we go into this avenue here for a little bit? All right. So, whoever wants to jump in.
That's not much of a jump, Michael. That was kind of like a
gaslighting. to me, it's all gaslighting.
Exactly. You're just shaking your head. What can be said?
I mean, we can dig all we want to into the chemistry of it, but there are so many stories out there. It's obviously gaslighting, and what I think is really the key here is to create fear among people who can't spend the time to dig into all these different stories. But I think from bottom line standpoint, once you hear contradictory statements, then you must assume that everything is gaslighting. And therefore it's designed to instill fear, to get people to do things emotionally that they wouldn't otherwise do logically, and yada, yada, yada. I mean, our governor, isn't it interesting that the first response that most people have is to think, what's the federal government going to do? Well, no, we have states, and the states have their own emergency management agencies that are supposed to manage these things by state. And yet the first thing, according to the news broadcast, is that DeWine immediately goes and asks for money from FEMA. Well, why doesn't DeWine do his job, get the Ohio Department of the Ohio Emergency Management Agency to do its job and take care of this? It's a one train wreck. And yet here we are involving all these federal agencies, and we're talking about poison clouds going all over the eastern part of the United States and blah, blah, blah. It just doesn't happen like that. We are being herded into an idea that only the federal government can save us, when in fact our founders said, no, they're the ones that are the problem. Let's keep it local. Let's keep it in the states. And yet we've thrown up our hands and we've said, federal government, come and Papa, come and save us, or Mama, come and save us. And we're going to wait until you do, and we're going to sit here and wring our hands. I mean, it's just one story right after another. Sorry, I'm a little bit cynical.
Oh, that's awful. We hate that. Okay, so
sure glad I'm not cynical.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm optimism all the way. I'm a coincidence theorist. I just love the coincidences. But but for what end, right? Cui bono or cui malo, or all the both of those things. Who loses? Who wins? And so I want to get into the specificity of some of the stuff you mentioned the other day about this exact spot, this thing to do about truncated fiber optic lines and the connection here with Enlight and the other internet company,
Earthlink,
the big one. And so and that these connect with
they're both big. And the other one, Enlight's associated with AT&T.
So before we jump into who they are, so my understanding is what you all were figuring out was this exact spot is where there's a cross of those lines, or there's a something right there where
the lines, the internet line between Chicago and New York and Washington goes through that area. There's more than one line that goes through there, but that is one of them.
Along the railway.
Along the rail right of ways. And when you think about it, it makes sense. They're going to put the line along the straightest route that they can pick, and the straightest route generally is the old railroad right of ways, and so that's where most of the fiber in the U.S. is housed. And if it's not housed there, it's housed inside oil pipelines that spread out throughout the country. Williams Energy out of Tulsa is one of the big providers of fiber networks in the whole United States. So the railroads make a lot of money from the right of way that they lease to fiber companies to run the fiber, and AT&T pays for a lot of that. So we've got a potential disruption of the entire fiber network that runs through Ohio, and that's some of the major internet trunks for the entire U.S., especially for the eastern part of the United States. Remember that power outage that occurred? It rolled from Akron. What was the name of the company? And then it rolled all the way through the East Coast and ended up putting New York in the dark. That's how central some of these systems are to the whole East Coast out of Ohio.
Interesting. And so what were you postulating would have been the point of this specific spot?
Some of that fiber is used for derivative trading between Chicago, New York, and therefore, if you wanted to have an excuse for suspending the markets, just say a bunch of our fiber melted in a train wreck. That would be an easy story to sell, and nobody could prove it one way or another. And that's the thing where I'm cynical about all these stories, because you can't prove it one way or another. And when you can't do that, from a civil engineering viewpoint, I like to see facts. And when I don't see facts, then it's just a bunch of hot air.
So that's an interesting speculation. And then we get into things like the, they're blaming it now on the fire chief, the same guy who was responsible for the My ID program.
Poor guy.
And now he's supposedly, they're literally coming out and saying that he was the one that made the choice, right? In conjunction with Norfolk Southern and local law enforcement.
Oh, I haven't heard in conjunction. I just heard each one of them claim they're the ones that made the decision. I think all the Ohio officials were running cover, and so they got the guy from Norfolk Southern to be the fall guy. He's probably the one with the least liability. That's my speculation.
Precisely.
Well, and then also, Douglas, you were mentioning in your video that you made the other day about this, all probability that Norfolk Southern is this close to BK, right? Because the railroads are in the tanker here right now; they're in the toilet, and that this is a way of restructuring that debt or whatever, and coming in with the new rail systems for Vanguard and for the Agenda 2030 situation of the you will own nothing and you will only travel by train. Basically.
Yeah, and it's the Green New Deal train. So you can't have any gasoline. You can't have anything reasonable. You have to have the smart rail. And the smart rail, the money's already been set aside for it. So it's happening, but nobody's talking about it. It failed in California. It failed on the East Coast miserably. It didn't even get started. And it's going to basically be, if they said that, if take the bottom line of the narrative, they consciously took an accelerant, put it on vinyl chloride and turned it into mustard gas, set it up as a cloud that they knew would go to the East Coast and to Canada and to one of the major waterways, the biggest freshwater waterway that we have probably in the world, right? Coming out of the Great Lakes, going down the St. Lawrence. Now Lake Ontario is poisoned. We see the pictures coming in from all over New York, especially Western New York, but now all the way to the coast. And then down in the other cities below that, people are sending in pictures of the rashes. They're sending in pictures that they're sick. They say they smell these different substances all over the place, like incredibly powerful, so on and so forth. Any place it rained or any place it snowed that was on either the trade winds or the way the winds blew that day are all going to be poisoned. What they're being poisoned with, we don't know. But we also know that the CEO of Norfolk Southern will be the only person held responsible for this crime against humanity if the narrative is true. He said he made the call. The mayor said he made the call. The governor said he made the call. The fire chief said he made the call after he called the Department of Defense and got permission. He literally said, though, in the interview, I heard him say it twice, that he didn't know who he talked with there, but they gave him permission to create a mustard cloud and send it over into Canada and to attack the American populace. That's not possible. And Trump is an idiot, but he's not so stupid to go into a mustard gas area, right? Plus, he's looked at a little bit of the news, but remember, there's been no news. There's only been Tucker Carlson, and he was just crybabying like he always does and doesn't go anywhere. So what's really going on? Nobody paid any attention to this until everyone wants to go there for their photo op more than 2 weeks afterwards, so that there's no evidence. And the things that they're collecting evidence with, don't forget that 2 days before the accident, they put up all over their town sensing devices to sense the air quality. And remember, they gave everybody their My ID so that they could do what? See if they had asthma, pneumonia, or they were having some kind of breathing problems. Okay. A lot of those people didn't take the My ID, but they've all taken it now. Would Trump walk into a disaster zone like that? No. So he knows from the beginning, and this is, again, more conclusive evidence that Trump is part of the globalists. He knows that this was all fake. He knows there was I said from the beginning, not one drop of vinyl chloride will be found. So the stuff they're finding in the rivers, they've actually closed off some of the intakes from the Ohio River and the three creeks that flowed out of East Palestine all the way down the Ohio. They're all contaminated. And they show some silly pictures of people showing dead fish, but that could happen by fracking. That could happen by the fact that East Palestine had, for 10 years, it was considered a hazard area because of the previous hazardous material spills and accidents that they've had. This isn't the first one. And so what were they really doing? They were, first off, in 2014, there were laws passed that said you had to use pneumatic brakes for any hazardous material on a train. And along with that, you can't stack up the weight of the train at the back of the train because it accordions the train the second that the air brakes fail, and the air brakes always fail. Most of these derailments are because of air brake failure and or an axle is on fire. So they have a black box every few miles. I forget how many miles, not many. They take a picture and they take a heat sensing picture of the axles on the train cars and the exchange box and the wheel. Well, we have pictures from just innocent people and from their doorbell cameras of the train going by with 3 separate fires, big fires going on 20 miles outside of East Palestine. So they automatically are supposed to stop the train, right? Because one axle goes out, there's a big crash. Now, remember that in 2017, Obama threw all these laws out. And he didn't say you have to go to pneumatic brakes. He didn't say that you shouldn't stack up the weight at the end of a car. And Michael pointed that out from the beginning. That train was going either a huge speed or it was a setup on purpose. Well, it was a setup on purpose. They set the fire because it would have stopped it from the heat. It would have stopped it back in St. Louis. It would have stopped it long ago from the heat of the axle. No, this is a fire. And I saw the fire, and there was 3 different shots of it. So you can go, yeah, that's it. People were freaking, that a fire, and then they see toxic material in tankers going by. Wouldn't you get a little worried? Okay. And so, and then when they threw these out in 2017, what happened? Most of the railroads, as they reported in their congressional begging for help recently, they're bankrupt. And what did Congress say? Well, we're not going to listen to a word you people say. We're going to intervene and we're going to create longer hours for all your people, no time off, no breaks, less people on every train, less security measures, and we're going to stick to annihilating the 2014 laws that would stop all of this. And don't forget that there were reports of terrorism bringing the derailers out. Over 1,000 derailers were found being shipped off the East Coast somewhere to derail trains. And don't forget, just 2 days ago.
Let's slow this down. Let's slow that down. That's a very important point that I think is really significant as we see constant derailments. And there are a lot of derailments, okay? And, they do happen. But there has been very, very peculiar ones. And I want you to say what you said again and, slower for the people that are.
In America, there's been over 1,000 derailments this year, 174 on Norfolk Southern itself. Okay. Recently, there were reports that they had captured in a truck over 1,000 of these derailers. And they show the derailers in some of these pictures. They're just a little thing. They don't weigh that much. You put that on, you're derailing the train. 2 days ago, there was a pipe bomb found on the East Coast on a rail track, and someone found it before it went off. So we have, and there's hundreds of tanker trucks in some of the biggest agricultural areas of America just sitting there. And no one knows what's in them, and they're not marked. No. This is a plan to bankrupt or to demonize rail, to demonize trains. And of course, a corporate guy is going to just get out. He won't even get a fine, even if it was true. And even if we have sent a mustard bomb, chemical bomb into Canada, he won't be charged a dime. How do I know this? The guy who created the Times Beach dioxin scandal was never charged. He knew exactly what he was doing. And the companies that produced the dioxin, that gave it to this idiot, they knew exactly what he was doing. Was anyone prosecuted? No. Will anyone be prosecuted by this? No. Is Trump an idiot? No. He's not going into a mustard zone. He's not going into a mustard gas zone. The firemen, as they were moving it from the tankers, the pictures show, they used fire hoses to move it into the trench. And then they supposedly put formaldehyde, because that's about the only thing that can get it going into a fire, to do a burn off. And by the way, a burn off of vinyl chloride has never happened in American history. And let alone that there happened to be enough formaldehyde to get it started. And why did they do this? Because of the mythology that once they took it out of the tank, well, it's true, the tanks can explode, but they explode by pressure, not by heat. All those tanks were in a fire that went on for 2 days and they didn't explode. So everything they're telling you is a big fat lie.
Yeah,
the
those
measuring
tanks
devices,
have contingency plans.
yes,
Every one of them.
the measuring device in the city marks it has to be over 580 particles per million of specifically vinyl chloride or mustard gas. Well, they're not going to find either one, so they show as 0. So they're looking for substances that were never there and ignoring the substances that were there. And we assume, out of your good research, the nickel oxide, well, it looks and acts and is very similar. It's also toxic and it burns the same way and it creates a different color. It has a different relationship to air, a different relationship to water. And so now we see all these anomalies happening and they fit the bill. This was planned. It was to demonize rail. It was to get into the substructure of the electronic system between COMEX and the New York Stock Exchange and the New York commodities market in preparation for the World Economic Forum's cyber octagon attack. Hello, we've already been told it's happening this year, so they have to get in to be able to create the fake things, just like they blew up Nord Stream 1 and 2. And they want to deny they did it when we have them literally with the smoking gun. And then what do we hear them saying? Well, tough luck, it's going anyway. Even if we did or didn't, and you accuse me or not, it doesn't matter. It's going to end.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Things are it's so blatant, they don't even try to hide it anymore, right? It's just full evil out in the open. And of course, this event we know is being used for multi-layer gains on their ends, whether it is, yes, like you said, we must get all these old janky rail systems off and put in the new smart systems. They're light rail, they're stuff with the Leviton trains of Japan. We know that McKinsey has teamed up with Hitachi. They're doing it in Canada. They've done some already in Honolulu. They want to do it here. And McKinsey, right? They're the working arm of the Cartel Babylon's economic hitmen, right? They come in and they say, this is what we can do. If we destroy all this, we can come back and do all this, and you get your Nikki Haley's and your Pete Buttigieg's and all your McKinsey
Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook.
Exactly. All these people that are part of the club, right? Part of the Babylonian club. And they, Nikki Haley, war, make me president, please, no peace, right? So we've got them doing that for the railroad purpose. We know they're going to be rezoning, right? And so catastrophes are great because it can give them, they could make a super site out of it. They could do whatever, to build it back better. And then, of course, there's the farmland issue. They can lie and say, oh, the farmland, it isn't safe. We have to, go to the vertical farming, et cetera, et cetera. And then the curious thing about the My ID, the digital ID, getting everybody onto these digital devices to get used to the medical tyranny of the digital. If it's not the plague, now it's the Marburg coming, and now it's it's the toxins in the air, and you must get on that ID, right? And so there's that. And then the curious thing about the nickel oxide is interesting about those 15 tankers arriving a few days ago, right around when those green water videos, were shown. It would make the water green, but also it's highly, highly conductive. And it actually can transmit, information. It's an incredibly highly conductive substance that they're going to be using massively in electronics and the internet of the future, this nickel oxide. And it also teams up with graphene to make graphene even more hyperconductive. And graphene's like the second most conductive thing on the planet besides helium. So with the graphene in the shots and in the State Department clinic, the Department of Health putting their clinic, and they're going to be like, hey, if you want this, you got to take a booster, right? Just all of that coinkydinks there of the water, the nickel oxide, the conductivity, the getting it under the skin, right? And whatever they want to try to do with this area and this poor area where people have zero resources to do anything except what they are faced to do. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with Trump's visit, with the DeWine and EPA situation as well, and what narrative is going to be spun coming soon. And we're almost at an hour here, and so I'm going to start wrapping up. And unless you all have a couple points, is there or a few more points that either of you want to make? Michael, we need to hear from you a little more.
Yeah, I was traveling this last month, and the Mexicans have a kind of a wry statement about a lot of this when everybody's caring about everything about us, and they have a joke that says that basically, "Don't care for me so much."
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. I know. And there's a lot of cultures have that same joke, and it's really true, right? Who asked you
Yeah.
to care about me? You know, get off my lawn, kind of thing, right? And so,
Yeah, I love that.
yeah,
Get off my lawn.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I guess we could wrap it up. I think that people can see the interconnections here when we're talking about things like Vanguard owning the railroads, owning the fiber optics, owning the internet companies, basically, creating this fourth turning into this new post-industrial world of human prison planet. Right? So this is just their escalation. And they're future shocking us all around and trying to put it in our face while simultaneously getting their rituals taken care of, right? Because they have to have that satanic revelation of the method and our participation, our passive participation in that. And I was wondering, Douglas, if you could close us out on that note.
I think that's absolutely right. It's really smoke and mirrors. It's a magic trick. The people who actually used to run the temples in the ancient days, they invented coins, and then they would give the coins out for the barley, and then you had to give the coin back so that you could get the grace of the god in the temple, which was a magic machine, and you put the coin in and the water comes out, and you don't understand, but you know you've been blessed. That's what's going on here. These are the same old tricks of con job priests taking over the sacredness of the temple and turning the temple into a bank. And now it's always the answer. Look to the banksters, look to these Pilgrim Society members, look to the people who control our stock markets. As we pointed out, these are all a very small handful of people. And so when it comes down to it, we don't have an America, and there's not a Ukraine. Ukraine just changed its name to the most corrupt country in the world because that's what it is. And we've just now given them over $200 billion in support, and they don't have a dime of it. 10 minutes later, so Biden just gave him $500 million more out of his pocket. Hunter, it was actually Hunter Biden's pants that had the $500 million in it. He reached in, saw it. Well, hey, I love you, Zelensky, as he's hugging him. When have you seen two leaders hug each other like they were porno stars? Okay.
Oh, you mean Doug Emhoff and Jill Biden?
Yes. I guess there are other. Yes. But this is the sickest. It's the sickest thing I've ever seen, this Ukraine thing. And by the way, people are worried there's going to be a nuclear war. There ain't going to be a nuclear war because we're not even sure those nuclear bombs can go off. As a matter of fact, all the evidence indicates that they can't, and that has been fake nuclear threats. And remember that his other threats, like supersonic missiles, we gave it to them. We American taxpayers paid the money to have Hillary Clinton give him supersonic missiles. It's nobody can stop. Oh, nobody can stop them. Nobody can. They're made.
Look it up, Sokolovo.
Yeah, Sokolovo. They're made here in America by Raytheon, and we gave them the technology, but we knew we gave them bogus technology. So when China tells you they have these wonderful things that they stole from us, no, we gave them bogus copies of it. And that's what's going on here. The whole thing is completely bogus. Everything you see in the news, go ahead and just assume that it is false. And remember, even though it's the war of all against all, according to my research with the ideas of the apocalypse, which I do believe is a true archetypal image, really, most of us are spared of that. Or there's a remnant of us that are spared of that. And unfortunately, people like you and I can't sleep easily, all of us, because we see these things and then they disturb us and we're trying to wake people up, right? 2/3 of humanity is asleep. 1/3 of humanity is going to be fine. And 1/3 of humanity is not even going through this war of all against all. They don't believe this stuff. They're not going to let them affect them, and they're not going to be controlled by the demonic fear and enslavement that these beings bring. And we can see this happening. Zelensky and Biden are both possessed by Lucifer and Ahriman, by literally, we would know who Lucifer is, the father of lies, but Ahriman is technology, right? Look at the technology exchange that's going on. Look at the bankster money that's going on. Look at the ideology that's being forgotten. Look at the fact that America has been on fire because of Ukrainian Antifa. All right? And no, we want to give money to them? It seems insane, but please remember, in my opinion, we all incarnated into this knowing it was going to be this way, but we knew at the same time that these are the best and these are the worst of times. So you have to keep your eye on the best.
Amen.
Awesome. Amen is right. Well, thank you both. It's been wonderful. Really great video here. And we're going to keep on here in this series, this Cartel Babylon series. And we do need to get into the, the examination of who, it needs to go further, right? There needs to be accountability with arrests and with perp walks and with prison time. And that it has to be gone after, really aggressively as far as these crimes, as they happen, because the big bankster vanguard situation isn't going to be taken down without these, without going after the medical cartels in real time, right. Everything. And so we have a lot of work to do, and we don't have to be afraid because there's really nothing to fear. We literally are, we're protected by God. And as you said, get behind me, Satan. We have continued existence and there is no fear. So our love, our heart resonance ties us together. We continue on prayer waves and that communing with each other in Christ, and Christ seated in our heart, and all is well. So I'll leave it there, folks. Amen. Thank you both. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Douglas.
You're welcome.
We'll see you next time. And everyone out there, you are free. We'll see you soon.